used to live in Homewood. Grew up there, as a matter of fact. Haven't been back in 25 years. 25 years. Yesterday, I just got in the car and drove. I had to get out of New York City. One more board meeting, phone call, report, problem. Probably would have jumped right out the window. That's walking distance, isn't it?
Yeah, about a mile and a half.
Yeah, that's walking distance.
Hello, and welcome to the Twilight Pwn, a podcast that discusses each and every episode of the Twilight Zone. My name is John, and I am joined by my co-host Fred.
Hello.
And this week, on our 6th episode of the podcast, we will be discussing the 5th episode of the Twilight Zone, Walking Distance. This originally aired on October 30th, 1959.
Martin Sloan, age 36, occupation, vice president, ad agency, in charge of media. This is not just a Sunday drive for Martin Sloan. He perhaps doesn't know it at the time, but it's an exodus. Somewhere up the road, he's looking for sanity. And somewhere up the road, he'll find something else.
What we like to do is listen to Serling's intro and, having watched the episode, kind of try and do a funny version, or what we think is funny version of that introduction. I think we're both a little nervous with this episode being so serious and of such high quality. It's less pwnable than others.
It's the least pwnable episode of the Twilight Zone we've done. But I'll go ahead and go first if you like.
Okay.
All right. Here we go.
Godspeed.
Wish me luck. Into the breach, lads. The poets say you can't go home again. Well, poets, as usual, are full of it. Because Martin Sloan, an overworked ad executive, is about to travel back in time to the home of his boyhood. There, he'll learn a series of important lessons, but none more important than the epiphany Martin has about how inflation can affect the price of a chocolate soda, especially if you order 3 scoops of the Twilight Zone.
All right. I think we touched on a similar vein in ours, so okay. I'll go. The sounds of a calliope, an out-of-control carousel, cheap ice cream sodas. These are the touchstones of the summers for every child from Birmingham to Burma. But as we grow older, the music fades, the carousel is condemned, and the cost of a soda increases exponentially to 35 cents. What if we could go back? Back to a simpler time. Back to a simpler place. Back to the Twilight Zone.
It's good. That 35-cent soda was a real touchstone.
That's we're going to be harping on that pretty hard. Yeah. And even that in the context makes complete sense and is valid, but it's all we got. So.
I know. To get people on the same page here, this is an episode with sort of the overworked ad executive Martin Sloan, who's just escaped New York City in his roadster, and he's longing for some kind of simplicity or rest from his workaday, Don Draper-esque lifestyle. And he stops at a gas station near his hometown, walks over to, revisit his childhood home, and slips back into time and has a series of increasingly meaningful interactions with his past.
Right.
And things happen.
So he's at the gas station. He's talking with the attendant. One thing I did find amusing is that the sign he looks at says Homewood, his hometown, 1.5 miles.
Yeah.
And he says to the guy, Homewood, huh? How far is that?
Yeah.
And the guy's like, 1.5 miles?
Yeah.
Like it's on the sign? And he's like, well, that's walking distances. It's like, yes. And
yeah.
I feel like they went out of their way to reinforce the walking distance title.
Yeah, they did.
Early on.
Yeah, the gas station guy's like, yeah, that's walking distance. And Martin Sloan's like, yeah, a human being is capable of walking 1.5 miles. One of the things, we've been poking a little bit of fun at Serling, but one thing he does very, very well is tell a story economically. I mean, from the very first shot,
Sure.
you see this car tearing down the road. It stops. It's a man in an expensive suit, but his hair is unkempt. So you kind of know a lot about this character right off the bat, you know.
Well, knowing Rod Serling and what we've seen of the Twilight Zone, when I see a character who's sweaty with mussed hair,
Yeah.
I assume he had just come from a montage.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I did like how, of course, this being Serling, wonderful economical storytelling, but he calls the name of where this guy grew up Homeville, or Homewood. It's just kind of like, yes, that's where I was born, Nostalgia Town, USA.
Right. As he leaves the gas station,
Yes.
there's a great directorial touch.
Yes.
The way we see him walk towards Homewood, we're catching the reflection in a part of the gas station mirror, and we see him walk in, and it zooms in until we can't see the frames of the mirror.
Yeah.
And then the next shot is Martin walking into a soda fountain, and we think we're seeing him, but we pull out and we realize we're seeing him in a mirror that is in the soda fountain. So just a subtle touch that was very, very cool.
Mirrors often in movies, when you see a character in a mirror, it's like there's something uneasy about it because you're not really seeing them, you're seeing a reflection. And I think what's so cool about that shot is that really he's kind of, the next shot he's in the past. You see him in the present, you see him in a mirror, and then he's in the past. And so it's kind of like this otherworldly touch that makes you feel like a little bit eerie. What's so cool about that is that literally the last episode of The Twilight Zone, at least sequentially, was the 16mm shrine. Very similar to this episode in terms of what's happening. There's a character who's not happy in their present-day life and is sort of longs to return to something more simple. And in that episode, if you remember, like the mechanism that gets Barbara Jean Trenton, the protagonist, back to the nostalgic past is like her wishing really hard, and then the camera goes kind of fuzzy, and it's kind of awkwardly done. But in this episode, it's just like very elegantly and simply done.
So he enters into the soda shop and he starts chatting with the soda jerk.
Yep.
And speaking of jerks, Martin was being a little bit unreasonably jerky, kind of smacking the chairs around and eating candy. So we get our first hint that things might not be what they seem here.
That'll be a dime.
Dime. 3 scoops?
That's the way we make them.
Well, you're going to lose your shirt that way. Nobody sells sodas for a dime anymore.
Yes, something is off.
Something is clearly wrong. The price of a soda is less than what I thought it would be. He talks, I don't know if you got this clip, but he's talking to the soda jerk about like how, the soda fountain is just as he remembered it from a child, and everything still tastes the same. And is Old Man Wilson? I know he died years ago, but I used to remember him back in the shop. But yeah, God rest Old Man Wilson's soul. He sure is dead. And the soda jerk is just like, like, but it begs the question, like, if someone walked into your office and was like, man, this place is great. I sure do remember your boss. Too bad your boss is dead. Your boss is deader than a doornail. Would your reaction just to be like, okay, like, he doesn't really react to it too much. Martin leaves the soda fountain. He's not really aware that he's traveled back into the past, but he's walking down the street of Nostalgia Town. And one thing I thought was kind of funny is that, like, you hear him say something like, oh, there's where the Wilcoxes lived, and there's where the Bradburys lived, which was, I think, a pretty obvious nod to Ray Bradbury, a writer that Serling liked. And then he sees a little kid playing on the street, and the kid kind of calls out to him. And the kid is none other than little Ron Howard there. A little 5-year-old Ron Howard.
Yeah, they have a little discussion about marbles. And then Martin tries to introduce himself, and we have this interaction happens.
You're not Marty Sloan. I know Marty Sloan, and you're not him.
Oh, why not? Well, let's just see what the old driver's license says, huh?
I maybe it shows that Martin is not very well in touch with people, but I like that gets in an argument with a 4-year-old and he's like, oh really? Well, why don't you read my driver's license?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
I happen to have my social security card with me.
I did really like that story beat. I thought it was a pretty cool moment that, like, oh, that's one of Marty's friends who's like freaked out seeing someone calling themselves Marty.
Yeah. Yeah. Right off the bat, he's kind of like a stranger in a strange land, and people aren't that happy that he's here. I mean, the kid is, that's not really, the kid is not like, you don't belong here, leave our paradise. But like, the fact that the kid is kind of reacting to him negatively, like, gets the ball rolling for the rest of the episode.
Next, he goes into the park, and
Right.
he sees a young woman with a baby stroller, and they have a conversation just about summer in the park and the music from the Calliope and the Carousel, and just
he finishes up the conversation with the woman, and he's talking about this, how he carved his initials into this bandstand, and he looks over at the bandstand, and he sees a kid carving some initials into a bandstand, and he runs over, and those initials are none other than his own.
again, like with Opie, he sees himself, his younger self sees him, and it's definitely not a welcome sight. I think the child version of him is more just freaked out that he's getting caught for defacing public property. But
yeah, and that was such a cool little touch, is that like there's a specific and logical reason why the boy is afraid of this older man, but you know, from the older man's perspective, it's kind of like more of an existential thing. It's like kind of freaky,
right?
And so he kind of chases his younger self, or at least runs to the house where he grew up, and then he has that interaction with his parents, right?
Another interesting directorial touch, which I actually read, this was very intentional, even in the writing from Serling, that he interacts with his parents through the screen door.
Yeah,
which it's subtle, but it does make them seem a little ghostly or a little more disconnected than they otherwise would have been.
Yeah.
So he goes to them, he tries to explain who he is, and very reasonably they think he's a lunatic.
Is that Mom?
Who are you? What do you want?
Who is it?
But you're both here. How can you be here?
What do you want, young man?
Mom, don't you know me? I'm Martin.
You must be a lunatic or something.
You mustn't be frightened. I grew up here, Mom. Don't you know your own son?
I sort of feel like in another plot, the character would very obviously say something like, "But Mom, you guys got divorced in Chicago after that fight," or, "Oh, Mom, a tree fell on you," but like he just kind of like has the reaction that a normal person would have, which is, clearly the parents are divorced or one of them has passed away in the present day, and his reaction isn't to like explain the backstory to the audience or to his parents, but just to sort of be like, "Well, why are you both here?" And I thought that was cool.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah, it was subtlety runs throughout this entire episode. So at this point, he still quite hasn't figured it out. He sees a kid in the neighbor's driveway, has a car, like a Cherry 30 Roadster, with a rumble seat.
Right.
And they have an interaction where the teenager is very excited and proud, talking about how he just got this brand new car.
Brand new 1934 Roadster. Right out of Detroit. And brand new.
Which, the thing that is very amusing about that is this directly precedes the scene where he talked with his dead mother.
Yeah, I know. It's like,
and the thing that makes him put the final piece in the puzzle is, wait, a car? A 34 car is new?
Yeah.
What's happening?
A rumble seat?
It's odd because, like you said, in a traditional narrative, that moment would absolutely be, he would say, "Mom, but you're dead."
Yeah.
Cue big glissando and commercial break or something.
Yeah.
But and here they were smart enough to be subtle about it there.
Yeah.
But then they still did it just in a completely odd beat.
I know.
A second later.
It is a weird beat,
It's like
too.
the network was like, we need something to get us into commercial, so you have to do this.
Yeah, pretty much. He goes back to his parents' house. It's night now. Martin has an interaction with his dad where he, reveals some facts that only the real Martin Sloan would know. And his mom comes out and he says, "I used to, have summers on this lake," and suddenly his parents are kind of like, "Oh, maybe this isn't a lunatic. Maybe something strange is really going on here." And he tries to, it's kind of funny because he does the same thing he does with young Ronnie Howard. He pulls out his driver's license and tries to show it to her, but she doesn't want to look at it. It's interesting. Like the people in this past world just don't want to interact with his real identity. So Martin clearly not getting what he wants out of this interaction with his parents. And then we hear the sound of the merry-go-round, the Calliope, coming in through the score, and Martin sort of has a new inspiration that he's going to go run and talk to his younger self.
As he makes his way to the carnival, we get the use of a lot of Dutch angles, which is kind of when the camera is slightly cockeyed.
Yeah.
again, these just interesting touches to heighten the unreality and the uncomfortableness as he gets on the merry-go-round where younger Martin is riding.
Yeah. The canted camera thing is maybe a bit of a cliche at this point, but at the time, I think it was probably still somewhat fresh, and I also think that it just, gives the scene this really cool sense of disorientation. The chase happening on a carousel it's not exactly a cliche of movies, but like there is a famous scene like that from the Alfred Hitchcock movie Strangers on a Train. I don't know if this was like a reference to that or anything.
I was going to mention this. I don't know if you discovered. I saw it on the internet, so it must be true.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's the same carousel.
Oh, really? Wow.
They rented the same carousel from Strangers on a Train, which, it did strike me as familiar. And then as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, yeah, that scene at the end of that one.
Oh, that's cool.
So,
one thing I thought was funny, too, is that, like, when I first saw that scene, I was like, I know I've seen this in a movie somewhere, like two characters chasing each other in a carousel. And I'm like, was that the Sandra Bullock movie from the 90s about the internet? Because I think there is a scene when, like, Dennis Miller is getting chased onto a carousel in the net or something.
On Strangers on the Net.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. So he chases young Martin off the carousel.
Yeah.
My understanding was young Martin fell off the carousel, landed on the ground, and possibly broke his leg or something to that effect. In some of the recaps I read, they said that what you were supposed to get was that the carousel actually ran over his leg. Did you get that at all?
Who are these recaps written by? What's your source?
I know.
What's your source on that recap?
I don't want to name names.
It was unclear. I mean, I don't think it's like I don't think it matters really.
I don't think it matters.
His leg is horribly injured, and it's because of his older self chasing him that has happened. And then the carousel, someone pulls a brake or the carousel stops, and this is a great shot in that happens next.
Definitely.
Is like. The older Martin is walking very slowly, and it's just so cool. He's all the kids are looking at him, and he's walking against them. Like they're facing forward, and he's sort of walking backwards. Yeah. You see that he's just so out of sync with this nostalgic world. Everybody else is facing one way, and he's walking the other way.
Right.
Once again in this episode, there's a very real and logical reason why they would be looking at him that way. It's not because of some mystical time travel thing or some vague idea. It's because, he's this old guy who just chased a guy around on a carousel. It's it's a great. I love that shot.
At the end of it, they carry off young Martin to get help, and all the lights dim, and you get basically a spotlight on Martin, which it's a subtle comes up. So at the end, he's the only person in light there, and it's just very good.
Yeah, it's good. One thing that was kind of interesting about that is that kind of lighting it's not very Twilight Zone-y. The Twilight Zone is generally filmed in a very like naturalistic style, which sort of like heightens the surreal things that happen within the world. And that choice is sort of it heightens like the emotional mood. It's not really
It's very theatrical, but it's very
theatrical and effective, but it is not very Twilight Zone-y, because in a way it's surreal lighting, but nothing surreal is happening in that moment.
Right. It's purely to underscore the emotion of the moment, his isolation, his loneliness. Yeah. And then he has a little soliloquy.
No more cotton candy. No more band concerts. I only wanted to tell you that this is the wonderful time for you. Now, here. That's all, Martin. That's all I wanted to tell you. God help me. That's all.
And it's very sweet. It's very well acted, but at that part where he was saying, like, no more candy, no more rides, he could have burst into song at any second there.
Totally.
There was... No one would have questioned it if he had. He was on a spotlight. The music was just humming, raring to go. Yeah. There was a little moment in there when young Martin falls off the carousel and hurts his leg. Old Martin immediately feels it. He screams out in pain and collapses.
After that, he's sitting on the carousel, having his sad moment.
Kind of despondent.
And his father comes out to meet him and tells him that young Martin's going to be okay, but his leg is injured and the doctors have said he'll be fine, but he'll have a limp.
Why I think people might be right with the idea that the carousel was supposed to have run over his leg, because the dad says something to the effect of doctors say the kid's going to make it, but he'll have a limp. And if a kid just fell off a carousel, it's he's going to make it. He'll be okay.
Yeah.
I think he'll be fine.
He's gonna make
Did
it.
you already say the father has looked at the ID and confirmed that old Martin is in fact who he says he is?
Yeah,
And they both
also notices that he's actually from the future because he sees the date on his driver's license.
Right. So at this point, they're both in the same boat. Neither of them can really explain why he is there.
Martin,
Yes, Pop.
you have to leave here. There's no room. There's no place. Do you understand that?
I see that now, but I don't understand. Why not?
I guess because we only get one chance. Maybe there's only one summer to every customer. That little boy, the one I know, the one who belongs here, this is his summer, just as it was yours once. Don't make him share it.
Right. And
Are you crying right now, John?
shut up. I watched it once and I got choked up, and I watched it again to record the audio and I got choked up again. So just playing the clip, no, not at that moment, but I'm sure if I had the visual of the pop, yeah, I probably would.
Yeah.
Is it so bad where you're from?
I thought so, Pop. I've been living at a dead run, and I was tired. And one day I knew I had to come back here. I had to come back and get on a merry-go-round and eat cotton candy and listen to a band concert. I had to stop and breathe and close my eyes and smell and listen.
I guess we all want that. Maybe when you go back, Martin, you'll find that there are merry-go-rounds and band concerts where you are. Maybe you haven't been looking in the right place. You've been looking behind you, Martin. Try looking ahead.
I heard a couple snickers, but that's some good quality
I
writing.
don't know.
That's
That's not my favorite line in that speech. I think it's a little. Up until then, I really like that. I like that bit, but that just goes a little bit too far overboard. It's the dad's like, maybe there are band concerts and carousels where you come from, Martin. It's like, yeah, Pop, like, I'm underwater on my mortgage and I got my secretary pregnant. Like, a carousel isn't really going to help.
It's a metaphorical carousel,
Oh,
Fred.
I didn't get
he means
that, John.
He means scotch and strip clubs, the
Exactly.
carousel of the adult world.
I really did like that moment, and it's very tender and sensitive. I just felt that line about like it struck me as a little too on the nose.
Let's for our audience listeners, let's just clarify for 1 second. Where are you currently broadcasting from?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
New York City,
Yeah.
right? You're a heartless monster.
You're in Austin, Texas. That's like
Whoa,
that's the
whoa.
New York of Texas.
I'm in the Homewood of Texas. You're in the big city. You're so stressed and underwater you can't even tell.
I know. I'm broadcasting from a roadster going down, going upstate New York, 60 miles an hour. My life with all these podcasts is just so stressful.
Right.
I need a break from this crazy world of podcasting about the Twilight Zone.
They say their goodbyes, and Martin gets onto the merry-go-round, which starts to spin.
Yeah.
Which transitions. The next cut is to a record spinning in a jukebox.
Yeah.
In the soda fountain.
There's kids dancing to music that is clearly not 1930s music. They're dancing to kind of like rock and roll, which is kind of funny because as a contemporary viewer, like I was kind of like, wait, which past are they in right now?
Right.
It's like people watching that at the time obviously would have known immediately, but there's a cool little subtle moment there too with Martin, like, comes into the drugstore and he sees this young woman who's supposed to maybe be like 18 or 19. His eyes sort of follow her, and I think like a less subtle episode of the Twilight Zone, he would say like, "That reminds me of my first girlfriend that I kissed behind the band shell." You know what I mean? But all you see is just him looking at her and kind of realizing, oh, like no, I'm just too old. That's not or maybe too young. In a way, I haven't quite gotten to midlife crisis Ferrari time yet, so it's a little bit out of range.
And lest it be completely clear that he is back in the present day, he goes up to the soda fountain, asks again for 3 scoops.
Yes.
And here's the interaction.
How about a chocolate ice cream soda with 3 scoops?
3 scoops? Sure, I can make one for you with 3 scoops, but it'll be extra. 35 cents, okay?
Oh, 35 cents, huh?
Oh,
The damn fortune.
Present, yeah.
Yeah, I like how the ice cream guy has sort of an unpleasant Brooklyn accent, too. It's kind of funny. It's like...
Yeah, Homewood has become completely overrun by the Bronx. It's just
Totally. It's like a weird, like, hipster neighborhood in the Bronx now. When he's talking to this Brooklyn soda jerk, he mentions how he has a bum leg now because he's picked it up. Young Martin got hurt by the Carousel. The soda jerk says something like, "Oh, did you get that in the war?" Which kind of like clearly indicates like, the difference between 1930 and 1950 is that World War II, was in between those 2 points, which is like a real, really, really changed the world, so to speak. So I thought that was kind of a cool little touch.
Right.
I thought it would have been funny if Martin had just like lied or something like that. The guy's like, "Did you get that during the war?" And Martin's like, "There I was, Normandy." It would have been great.
Pretty much the episode winds down. He rudely turns down the outrageously expensive
35-cent ice cream, yeah.
Right. And then he leaves there, and the next shot is him kind of matching his walking towards Homewood. He's now walking away from it. There's a very good Serling close. I could play it. Fred, you would, I'm sure, consider it maudlin and crap.
Yes. Me being a tough soda jerk from Brooklyn,
bit of trivia. The director, J.J. Abrams, famous for creating Alias and Lost, and now he's in charge of the Star Trek franchise.
And Star Wars coming up, I might add.
Has that been definitively confirmed? Feels like there's so many rumors going back and forth on that.
Yeah, not sure about that, but it seems likely.
Yeah. So he holds this as his favorite episode of the Twilight Zone, and he referenced it as the name of the military operation in his film Super 8 was called Walking Distance.
Yeah.
And just another bit of trivia, the park in the episode was said to be inspired by Recreation Park in Binghamton, New York, where Rod Serling grew up. It had a carousel and a bandstand, and there is a plaque commemorating Rod Serling for all those folks traveling to Binghamton.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Fred, were you able to catch the MST3K connection?
The inevitable MST3K connection. I really think we should spring, now that we have like 20 plus Twitter followers, we should spring for like a band to record like a radio jingle style thing, like the inevitable MST3K connection. But yes, Ron Howard also played a character by the name of Genius in Valley of the Giants, I believe it was, which is an MST3K episode. Is that what you were thinking of?
That is indeed correct.
Yeah, good stuff. Along with Beau Bridges, that's a real star-studded episode.
Episode was directed by Robert Stevens, who also directed the pilot episode Where Is Everybody? And I read an article about it. It was rather interesting. Apparently, the normal Twilight Zone episode would shoot in approximately 3 days. Usually had a budget of about $45,000 or so.
Yeah.
At least in the first season. And apparently, this episode took almost a week to shoot. It went ridiculously over budget and over time. That was part of the reason why he was never asked back to direct another one. Because,
oh, really? This is the only one he ever directed?
Well, he directed two. He directed the pilot, they gave him the ability to put a little extra effort because they wanted to make something that looked really nice to show to the network, and they let him do this one. It's a little bit of a shame because it shows that some of the episodes you just wonder if they'd had a little more time and a little bit more money.
Yeah,
some good episodes might have been great.
Yeah. I mean, this may be a bit of a controversial statement, so get your pens out, bloggers. But I don't feel like The Twilight Zone is usually a great showcase for directing. I mean, I think that it's more of a showcase for the writers and the actors. It does best when it's shot in sort of a naturalistic style. But this is an episode where the director made a lot of stylized choices, and they all worked really well. I mean, I've seen a lot of episodes of The Twilight Zone, and I think this is like the only one where I've really noticed the directing. So it's kind of a shame that, this guy didn't do more.
But you have to wonder, you say, it's not really known for its directing, but how much of that is a function of they were shooting 30 minutes of, script in 3 days and just kind of rushed.
Yeah.
Maybe if they'd had time.
Everyone involved in this episode just did a great job. I mean, To move on to the score, we've talked about a little bit in the commentary, but, Bernard Herrmann. Yeah. I mean, Bernard Herrmann, to me, I love him, and I've, long been a fan of his. And Vertigo is, one of my favorite... It is my favorite movie of all time, and it has, an amazing score. And I think what I love about the score so much is that it's really... It's omnipresent. It's almost always playing. It underscores what the actors are doing in the emotional state of the scene, but it never feels jarring. And I think the same thing is true here. And there's something kind of old-fashioned about that in a way. Modern movies don't have score constantly going. It just made perfect sense to me, and I think it's another great aspect of this episode.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that's pretty much for the bios and the trivia. Just for general discussion, I think we both can agree. We liked it.
Yeah, it's a good one. Hard to pwn.
I don't think...
Bad episode of our podcast equals good episode of The Twilight Zone.
Right. And I don't think you can really find a twist in it.
Oh, yeah, you? Yeah. I mean, no, there's no...
Would you say there's a twist?
No, there's no twist. This episode proves that not all episodes of The Twilight Zone have to be shocking or, have a twist to be very good. I think, this is the great episode of a supernatural element being brought in to make an emotional point as opposed to a clever gotcha type of thing. I think that's cool.
Absolutely. It did get number 9 in Time Magazine's list of 10 best episodes, but most of the time if you're talking to people, remember that great Twilight Zone episode, they tend to remember the twist ones are just kind of iconic and easy to come up with. This is kind of a fantastic episode that doesn't always get mentioned.
Yeah, this is kind of this is gourmet's choice. In the general population, people don't remember this episode as much, probably because it doesn't have some shocking, unexpected twist. It's just a nice tone piece,
Yeah, I mean, I was predisposed going into enjoying this episode, probably. I'm kind of a nostalgia junkie. Just in general, I think nostalgia is a powerful emotion that runs through our culture more and more as the internet becomes popular and we have instant nostalgia. Everyone's like, geez, do you remember that crazy thing we were doing back in 2009? Boy,
Friendster. It'd be great if this episode was set in the modern day and it's just a guy revisiting his Friendster profile or something like that. The problem with nostalgia is that it's kind of plotless a lot of times. You know what I mean? It's basically It's just holding up an object from the past, looking at it, appreciating it, and putting it back down again. I think this episode, does it really well, and I think that
and it makes a great point about nostalgia, which is tied up in the close of, we all have this longing to go back at some point or another, but it's kind of just a fanciful emotion, and it's...
Unless you're Barbara Jean Trenton, star of the silver screen, and you wish yourself back into the Thin Man.
It's kind of a nice message. Those feelings are valid, and, we can understand them, and it's nice to remember the past, but then you need to kind of laugh and shrug it off and keep on LIVIN.
I hear you. Living. YOLO, bro. Because I am the Gene Siskel of this podcast and you're the Roger Ebert, I do have to say that on some level this episode, it doesn't suffer from this, but it's kind of some of the same thing of Mr. Denton on Doomsday in the sense that it's a great episode that I'm not dying to watch again just because it's not riveting and there's not a lot of plot stuff happening, and I think it's a great episode that I'm happy to see every now and then.
IMDb gives this a rating of 8.2. I think that is pretty high. Just to kind of check the calibration again, Eye of the Beholder has a 9, so it's not exactly at the top, but a good rating. Yeah. So what do you think?
It's tough. It's definitely not a 10 for me, but it's either an 8 or a 9. I feel like it's a little silly to put it only one above Denton on Doomsday, because Denton on Doomsday is a good episode, but it's definitely not great and not in my top 10.
Right.
So I think I'm going to go with 9.
I might live to regret this because we have a lot of episodes to go, but I think I'm going to have to go ahead and give it the 10.
I wish we had a little alarm or sound effect to play.
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah. I mean, I think it's extremely well crafted, emotionally affecting television. And like you said, they're able to bring in a supernatural element. Which episode was it you were talking about? Perhaps Whipples, where it was the supernatural and the theme just basically got in a horrible car accident with each other, and neither helped the other. Yeah. This is one where the two elements are just really, they blend so perfectly.
Yeah, completely.
All right, so that pretty much wraps up Walking Distance. And next week, we will be listening to our first listener-requested episode. This came from one of our Tumblr followers, Dee Dee Hoffman, asked for us to check out the episode Printer's Devil. That's in Season 4, which is not available on Netflix, but I'm pretty sure if you go to Hulu, you should be able to find it there so you can watch it on your computer.
Cool.
We appreciated the episode request, and if you guys have any comments or thoughts on episodes we've already done, we'd love to hear them. You can get in touch with us through our Tumblr page, twilightpwn.tumblr.com. We're also in iTunes. You can email us at twilightpwn@gmail.com.
Any closing thoughts on Walking Distance, John?
Happy St. Patrick's Day,
right. It
Fred.
tied in so well with this episode of the Twilight Zone. It's funny, I was looking for an episode that had a leprechaun or something, but there isn't one. The closest you get is a stereotyped Irish immigrant character in a Season 5 episode about a mobster ventriloquist dummy. And no, I'm not kidding. That is a real episode.
And yeah, I don't know. I don't want to go typical Irish stereotypes, here's another Irish dummy ventriloquist mobster.
Yeah, I know. So played out at this point.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll see you next week, John.
All right, take care.
Bye.